Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Expert Age, a thought leadership initiative by Quadrant Knowledge Solutions. I am Ajinkya Ingle. Welcome you all to Expert Age. Expert Age is designed to bring together industry leaders and our experienced analysts to explore critical topics within the ICT domain, offering valuable perspectives and knowledge sharing. Today, we have an insightful discussion planned on the future of intelligent business process management suites, IBPMS market. We will cover various aspects, including current trends, growth potential, the end user adoption trends, and of course, the importance of intelligence orchestrations with the IBPMS suites. I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists. Today, we have with us Brian Reale, founder of ProcessMaker. For over 20 years, Brian has been leading the vision and strategy of global leader in business process automation and intelligent document processing software. He has a strong background in open source software, e-commerce, and web development. He also holds a Fulbright scholarship in Quechua and linguistics. Brian has also co-authored a book on business process modeling. Apart from this, he is also a mentor at Founder Institute, where he helps aspiring entrepreneurs launch their ventures. Thank you, Brian, for taking time out and participate in today's discussion.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be here.
Alongside, we have two experts, Apoorva Dawalbhakta, Associate Director of Research for BPM and Process Automation at Quadrant Knowledge Solutions. Apoorva brings in over 10 years of rich experience in BPM and process automation. Along with him, we have Kunal Pakhale. He's the analyst at Quadrant Knowledge Solutions. Brian, Apoorva, and Kunal, thank you for joining us today. Without a further ado, I would like to hand over the conversation to Apoorva to kick off our discussion with the first question.
Thanks, Ajinkya. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to connect with, a market leader, a global leader, and founder of a global leader company like ProcessMaker, right? And I'm truly obliged. It's a great feeling to interact with these leaders because the rate at which the market is moving and so many new developments are happening, right? It is apt for all of us to just take a moment to pause, to understand each other, and to really understand what the market is actually bringing to the table, right? So. In context of the research study at Quadrant Knowledge Solutions, ProcessMaker is routinely getting positioned in very competitive positions across our Spark metric studies. It could be IBPMS, it could be process mining, it could be other studies as well, right? So, without further ado, Brian, I would like to just jump into the meat and just jump into the action of things. IBPMS, we have been hearing this terminology for quite a while now. I believe it's more than 7 to 8 years, 10 years almost that this terminology is there. A lot of research is happening across the analyst firms. A lot of developments are happening at the vendor front. So, according to ProcessMaker, how do you guys actually define the IBPMS market, and what are the current trends in terms of how where the market direction is moving? If you could just throw some light on that, it would be great for a conversation starter.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Apoorva. It's great to be here, and thanks for taking some time to explore these topics. So, I think for me, it's important to probably step back and say how we got into this market and what it was when we first got into it. So, I founded ProcessMaker with a childhood friend of mine in 2000. We originally set the business up to do something very different, and we were kind of exploring things for really the first few years. And then around 2006, we realized we were building some enterprise systems, and we kind of realized these were workflow systems. So we decided to call our software workflow software. And this was 2008 when we launched ProcessMaker as an open source workflow solution. And ProcessMaker is still an open source solution. We have 3 core components which make up our open source: an engine, a modeler, and a forms layer. So when we got into the market, we called it workflow. We sort of positioned and said, hey, there are some workflow solutions out there, but they're big, they're heavy, they're a bit harder to use, a bit clunkier, and we really wanted to offer a simpler solution to the market. And people understood workflow. BPM was a term that was being used, but we noticed it didn't quite have as much traction. So we generally use those two terms interchangeably. And then the idea of BPM has sort of kind of come and gone in and out of favor over the years. Many times when sort of the standards came out, so BPMN, the first version, and BPMN 2.0, in the very beginning, we did not support the standard. And like many, we sort of said, hey, this is complex. And so it's a little bit too complex. And so those that didn't support the standard would often use that as their sort of way to say, well, why don't we focus on BPMN? But nowadays, ProcessMaker is a fully BPMN compliant product. And so when we talk about the terminology, I think the terminology is one thing and the market is another, because in reality, it's been around for a while. These concepts around BPM, BPMN, flow charting in general. And then new terminology came in around low code. I think that sort of also confused the market a little bit. And I think low code is about to, I think we'll see low code disappearing, because now really you have a version of low code which is not visual, it's prompt based. And so now you can actually do high code with no code, meaning you can just describe a prompt and let AI sort of generate what you need to generate. So I think first of all, there's the change in the terminology, and whether it's iBPMS, BPA, IPO, for us, these tend to be terms and labels that do kind of come in and out of favor. But what they're generally describing is this ability to orchestrate processes. And so we always thought of our product as that its core functionality is orchestration. It is saying what's going to execute and when it's going to execute, and then moving an imaginary or even physical token forward so that we know, well, who's the next person that needs to do something, or what's the next system that needs to then be called to do something. So it's that orchestration layer, which then gets packaged with a number of other things like forms, the ability to build and deploy forms, scripts, the ability to deploy and write scripts, connectors to other systems, decision tables or rules tables. And now really an RPA might be something you're calling in this system as well, so robotic process automation. And now really where I'm sure a lot of the conversation today will go is Gen AI. So we think about all of these things getting orchestrated. Some of those might be included in a definition of iBPMS, others might not be included. But I think the biggest trend we're seeing is that the lines are rapidly blurring. And we used to say this, 5-10 years ago, but it is nothing like today. So the difference between an iPaaS, the segment of the market really concerned with connectivity in and out of systems, versus RPA, what I would call, robotic process automation, that's more concerned around short running processes, and then process orchestration, which is really joining people across teams to execute work. Those lines are blurring really rapidly, and that's probably the biggest trend, and that's being driven by the AI without a doubt. So yeah, I think that is that's the kind of biggest trend we're seeing in that space.
Awesome. I think you mentioned orchestration there. I'll come back to that point in a while because it's again a topic close to my heart. But I think I'll hand it over to Kunal if he has certain points to add or he wants to take up any other question, right, Kunal?
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Kunal.
It's great that you mentioned process orchestration is, according to us, it's something, it's a really big thing that's going to happen in the automation industry, because it's ability to bring people automation and application, and ability to reorchestrate the entire thing into the real time is something we are observing in the orchestration market as well. And since you have also mentioned about the robotic process automation and how we are looking at the vendors having the broader strategy when it comes to their automation scenarios, like not only use the one automation tool for it, but to have a broader spectrum of automation tool for their end-to-end automation scenarios. So when you look at the ProcessMaker, you guys have done a lot of acquisition in this space as well, right? You have recently acquired Workfellow for process mining capabilities, and you already have IDP. So ProcessMaker is also offers a very consolidated platforms with a lot of technologies. So end user adoption. Our next question is regarding end user adoption only, right? So we are looking like end user adoption trends in the iBPS market. We wanted to ask you this.
Yeah, so I think from an end user perspective and an adoption perspective, I think it goes back to there have been a series of tools, and our customers tend to tend to be mid-market and large enterprises. So we're generally looking for, in our case, for organizations with call it 500 users and above would generally be the place where orchestration it really becomes a pain point. If you're a small business under 100 people, orchestration is probably not your top concern, and you want more flexibility around the way things are done, the way work is performed, and so you're generally not looking for this kind of orchestration layer. There are exceptions in higher value places and higher value industries, but what we see is that customers really, their objective is to automate something. So they may not, they know that, hey, I received this PDF and then I need to get that information into my core system, into my ERP system. And along the way, there are certain people that need to add their data to it, their opinion, they need to evaluate it. And so they're thinking of an automation. And then they receive messaging from vendors who, of course, if you're a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And that's really where the industry has always suffered. So the RPA vendors are saying, well, that's an RPA problem. The integration platforms as a service, the iPaaS kind of look at it through their lens, and then BPM looks at it through its lens. So I think where the market is finally getting to is, one, it's become very, a lot of us are consolidating these tools. So as you mentioned, we acquired in about 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, we acquired an intelligent document processing company because our customers didn't differentiate when they're acquiring ProcessMaker, didn't differentiate with the fact that they have data trapped in some different file formats, PDFs, Excels, emails. They just know that they need to get that into their process, and that's key data that they're manipulating. And so that is kind of a seamless piece, but prior it was really considered a segment of its own. I think that line is rapidly blurring. And interestingly, right after we acquired this IDP technology based in the Netherlands and a team based in the Netherlands, then the whole phenomena around generative AI really started blowing up and happening, and especially around what you can do with LLMs. And so we noticed, well, we can do some of the same things we could do with IDP using Gen AI, and those two things have now blurred, and it really depends on your use case. Everything boils down to the use case and costs around the use case, around doing the training, around doing the execution. So essentially these just become slightly different tools. From a customer perspective, it's still about, hey, I just want to automate this process. So what we see from the customers are, hey, we have an automation need. It really doesn't, we don't really think about it in terms of this is an RPA, that's the way they used to think about it maybe 5 years ago, but now it's, I need a set of tools that do this and that automate. And if I can use an API to get the data instead of a bot that goes and crawls and scrapes and inserts some data, fine. And if that's more secure, then even better, that's my choice. Or if Gen AI can do that and reliably do it and not, hallucinate along the way, then that's fine too. And all of this blurring, I think, is moving up to reinforce the idea that there is this overarching orchestration that needs to happen, and maybe intelligently needs to decide exactly what micro tool to deploy, whether that's IDP, a script, Gen AI, RPA, to actually do the work.
Hi, Brian. Since every vendor is trying to achieve, generative AI, in trying to integrate the generative AI into their system, But what we are observing is they are not using it as a very transformative technology. Like it will transform your entire applications or entire software. What we are observing it will reduce the barriers to entry for for someone who is very less uh, familiar with the software. What do you think about this? Like, is it like having the transformative potential, or according to us, it will enable more citizen developers to get to know your software better, or act as like on the surface level?
We see it as being absolutely fundamentally transformative. Now, is it there today? No. And so, our approach to generative AI, which I don't think has been that different than most in the market. So I think what we've seen is most have generally come to the same conclusions, and we're seeing it generally applied in similar ways. So when we looked at process automation and orchestration, we first went to design mode, and we began applying AI. So in our case, of course, the first real significant applications for design mode AI were these co-pilots that can kind of code alongside coders and develop applications. And for ProcessMaker, that meant kind of three areas in our solution. It meant, hey, can we make it easier to design the process? Can we make it easier to design a form? And can we make it easier to design a script or a connector? Those were kind of the first three areas we looked at, and we said, yes, this is a great way to apply this. And that's where it becomes interesting. So the whole drag and drop phenomena, the whole low code phenomena has been around for, I don't know, a decade or so in terms of having drag and drop designers to design your workflow. And we think it's super easy, but we forget when we start talking to a user that's never used it, it's still a little bit difficult. Well, where do I drag? How do I do it? How do I connect? I have to label things. I have to label them correctly, and then they make mistakes along the way. So with AI, we first developed a text to process capability where you can simply describe the process that you want to automate in human language, and then our AI generates the process in perfect BPMN for you and perfectly labeled, which is amazing. We did the same thing for forms. You can describe your form, and the more specific your prompt, then of course the better the form will be. But you can even just start with a very generic thing, like give me an employee onboarding form, and we'll generate that first pass for you. So it gets you going much faster. And if you get more specific, it does an even better job. And then for scripting, write me a script that does this, or hey, here's a script I found, explain it to me. So our AI will both write the script for you, it can clean the code for you, and it can explain the code or document your code. Since then, we've added in a one-touch or a one-click AI where you describe the process, and then we asked you, would you like us to try and generate a working process based on your description? And that is unbelievable. So we will generate the BPMN, the process itself, we'll write the scripts, and we will design the forms all based on that original description, so that about a minute later, you can click start an instance of the process and you can try the process. So that on the design side is what we did with AI. We actually went another step further where now you can take a picture of a whiteboard where you've written a process, or a piece of paper where you've drawn the process, and we will translate using our AI your drawing into a process and use the same end-to-end capability to go from drawing to working process in just a few minutes. So that was our first real kind of AI inclusion, and that's on the design side. Then on the run side, I think, and that was, that's it's an incredible experience to see that for the first time. But on the run side, it's actually much more powerful, and this is where you can start to see it even a little more transformative. We have what we call a task type. It's an AI agent. We call our AI agent Flow Genie. And in Flow Genie, you're basically, as part of an orchestrated process, you'll arrive at this task, and this task is already designed. It's a prompt, so you've already fed it with your prompt when you designed it and said, this is what I want to happen. You can receive files if you want, and you can do everything you can do in a regular sort of Claude or ChatGPT environment saying, hey, this is the information I want to get back. But here it's part of a coherent process. So something's being fed to it via the JSON object that's flowing through the process. This gets evaluated by that prompt. If it's a file, we can accept the file. We could say, hey, extract the data from the file. Maybe it's driver's license. If Kunal is an organ donor, then create a field called organ donor and mark it as true. And then I could hit a gateway and make a decision and go further in my process. That's the second step. And then finally, the third piece of AI for us is really using customer data to train and to use that as your source of truth. So whether that's uploading documents or uploading an entire data set of positive outcomes, and this is where it becomes transformative. If I take terabytes of information that's already run, and the AI really can tell what the positive outcomes are, I could then use that to start informing my decision making on newer decisions in the process. So that's where how we see it really playing out in process orchestration.
That's great, Brad. That's great, man. Looking at like how ProcessMaker using generative AI, we would love to look this in demo sometimes in the upcoming briefings or whatever. And I think I'll hand over to Apoorva.
Yeah, I think the way Brian described it, it's super exciting. And I think we are all pumped up for the upcoming primary briefing sessions as well, which happen routinely for our Spark Metrics study. I just want to, Brian, because see, the thing is, these kind of video initiatives, the purposes are a couple of them, right? One thing is also because we have a lot of end user base and we really want to make them understand or help them or assist them in realizing which kind of vendors they should be going after, right? Identifying their needs first, and then learning to identify which kind of vendors they should be opting for, right? So in this sense, and obviously you as well interact with a lot of end users, and you might be resolving a lot of their problems, their issues, and their requirements as well. So I just want to understand from you, like if you had to put it simply to the end user, how would you describe the importance and relevance of something like an intelligent orchestration component within the IBPMS suites, right? Like, because at Quadrant, we feel that the intelligent orchestration component has to be by default within IBPMS suites, as you rightly mentioned. But from an end user perspective, how important it is to, have these ingrained within the IBPMS suites. Just wanted to have your take on that.
Yeah, I think from a customer perspective, the need for this layer of automation is growing, and fundamentally it's growing because the number of applications in the enterprise is growing, and so the need to coordinate between these applications. And I know that sounds to many people a little bit circuitous because there are so many types of applications out there that sort of claim that you need them to help you manage your other applications, which is the irony. And I think that's what makes it really difficult for most customers. I think for larger customers, they do understand this idea of a stack, a technology stack, and understand that an orchestration layer is something they're going to need. I think the first kind of orchestration layers that really paved the ways were the ESBs. So you need kind of an enterprise service bus to connect your different APIs into, and then you connect to that to allow new applications to gain access to data. A data lake also fills part of that role, like, hey, I'm going to push all my data in here, and that's where I'm going to make sense of it. And so you need both of those, for example, but then there is another layer, which is the process orchestration layer, which is a little more service oriented. So we used to have the term the SOA, service oriented architecture, and that's fallen a little bit out of favor, but that's really still probably the best explanation. So if I look at a company from an end user's perspective, and maybe I'm buying something, there's so many other things that happen in the e-commerce process behind the scenes. But from a customer's perspective, I'm just looking at it from that service perspective. And so that's really where the orchestration layer comes in. It thinks about it as a holistic service. So it's not just the connectivity, It's not just the data for reporting, it is the end-to-end process and how that should be perceived, whether it's an internal stakeholder or an external stakeholder. And so you really have to kind of get your mind around that as a customer to understand why why you need this technology. It is becoming easier for us to explain that and sell that, because I think that again, as the landscape becomes more and more sophisticated, and now with the emergence of the Gen AI, it's just more and more apparent that you need to be able to adapt your business processes more quickly, and that's where this type of technology really fits in.
Yeah, I think you summed it up beautifully in this answer, I think, because at Quadrant, interestingly enough, Kunal, myself, Arun, Pranjal, and Anuj, all of us, I think we have been actively working and developing, architecture frameworks for something like an intelligent process orchestration, right? Because many of our competitors were using the terminology process orchestration, but we realized that it was kind of archaic. And we feel that the market truly is going towards intelligent process orchestration, right? And the way we define it, I think it's more or less exactly similar to the way what you describe currently, right? It amalgamates a perspective of the vendor, of the end user, and actually integrating that intelligence within the processes, identifying and streamlining the process flows, right? So just wanted to add that, and it acts as a it acts as a leverage for us as well, because it tells us that we are exactly thinking in the right track. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, and I like the IPO term. I think that that is a good term, and I think when I hear that, so again, the term that I think we were never a big fan of was low code, because low code, there was always the sort of DNA that came from process and the DNA that came from what I would call CRUD systems: create, update, delete, sort of more database, low code, mobile apps that just kind of information in and out. It's more case centric, more case management. And then there's the more process management. They could both be low code, but low code tended to mix those two. And I think there's a place for each one of those. So I would say that something that helps you build data apps versus process apps. IPO, for me, again, it means that since we really see a fast convergence around what is actually doing that last mile or last inch of work, whether that's RPA, connector, iPaaS, Gen AI, or IDP, or a script, so or even a decision. So almost those 6 things, the things that plug into your BPMN diagram, we see that collapsing fast. And so if you're in one of those categories, we think you're endangered, frankly, as a category. So, and I've heard this from the RPA vendors. Like, RPA went from being the darling of the industry to really being something that is looked down upon now. And all the RPA players are quickly trying to reposition as Gen AI players, which makes sense. And we can do things with Gen AI so much faster than we can with a decision table, than with a script, even with an automated AI writing the script, or with a bot. And so the Gen AI is under the hood, it may still be using RPA, still using connectors, and so I think a lot of those players will still get their share of revenue from that. But Gen AI is making it so much easier to do. So we see that as being this like mega task type, and it can be used for almost anything. And we're seeing our competitors also taking that stance, like, hey, it's so much easier now with this task type. So I think just IPO for me means those tasks might be collapsing, but you still need the full orchestration.
Perfectly summed up. I think I'll just share a very small anecdote. So I have been researching the RPA sector for multiple years now, and last year it so happened that I was the main analyst for RPA, right? I solely handled that study. And the point that you made, that glaring observation for me was so much there, right? Every so-called big RPA vendor was trying to position themselves either as an intelligent automation player, end-to-end automation player. And it was clear that, the RPA market is moving at a spectacular pace. Some vendors are ready to admit and adapt. Others, well, as you rightly pointed, probably they are a little late in admitting. But yeah, I think these are interesting times for them as well. So I'll hand it over to Kunal. Kunal has a couple of points from his side as well.
Yeah, thank you, Apoorva. As Apoorva and Ryan have really summed up about our perspective toward the intelligent process orchestration. And what we are seeing as the organizations who are trying to implement this stuff have a broader automation strategy at place. So not only they are federating their entire automation strategy around multiple technologies, like combining RPA with other technologies under the broader framework of the BPM. I think that's the way to go moving forward. Uh, have all the technologies and have BPM as a framework for it. And also, moving on, we are looking at the RP vendors, as Apoorva mentioned. They are acquiring and moving into a different spaces altogether. The generative AI is something which is very important. As I previously mentioned, it's lowers your barriers to entry and to know about the products and the softwares and everything. And with the low code, we are observing a problem, as you have mentioned, that you have to have a certain capability or have a technical knowledge as to how and why. What we are also observing is you can directly fed these BPM models and others into the generative AI, and that will help have a better semantic understanding of the entire processes, and it will guide the users better. So, what's your take on this? I would like to know.
Yeah, I think again the use of the Gen AI inside the models is going to be transformative, and it's going to be transformative in the sense of, so when I was speaking earlier and mentioned, we applied it first to design, then we applied it to a task type inside ProcessMaker that can just do a lot and collapse IDP and RPA and IPAS into sort of one much faster way of doing it. And I say faster in the sense, so for POCs, there's no doubt that we use a lot of that. Once you get into production level, then it gets a little different, because now, cost models are still sort of something that's being explored. And so a lot of times the Gen AI can be a little more expensive and you might not need it for all cases. But then the transformative piece is taking the data and filling and using that to inform what the process is doing. And so we've introduced some features which allow users to kind of set and forget, like you would in your email. Hey, I want to automatically respond to this. I want to respond to that other thing automatically. So you have a combination of the Gen AI and the ability to apply rules in your inbox to kind of automate the next task you will take. And that's just a micro step away from basically letting the Gen AI surface, hey, we think with 99% certainty that you should approve this loan application, because, of course, as the AI, we've reviewed the last 20 million loans that have been issued. We looked at default rates, and we know that based on all that information, we're almost certain you should approve this. So we already do that in IDP, where we say, hey, we have 95% certainty that this is the information and that what we extracted is correct. You can review it if you want, or you can set a threshold and say, oh, look, if it's 92% or above, just let it go to the next step. I'll just assume that information is correct. So what's the difference of letting that get to a decision point and then saying the AI said with 92% certainty that it thinks we should approve this loan, so why have a human even review that? And once you do that, then you're talking about reducing end-to-end SLAs from, whatever they might have been. Maybe it's 4 days, maybe it's 4 weeks, to potentially minutes. Because if you look at the main time it takes to complete a process, it's the wait times in between when I route something to Kunal and Kunal routes something to Apoorva. And those are for the approvals. But if we can now take those approvals based on historic decisions and mapped back to positive outcomes, then you're talking about, instantaneous orchestration.
Oh, that's great, Brian. We have looked into a lot of process, like generative AI use cases in the process that are already very well defined. So, and the model is already very established, and there are hardly any bottlenecks. And if there are bottlenecks, there are already planned events that you can sort those stuff in the real time parallelly. So what other exploratory use cases are we looking at the ProcessMaker, where the process is not very well defined with the use of generative AI?
So from, again, use case standpoint, we see there's just, it's sort of endless. And so with these AI agents available inside the process now, I can really access anything. And once I apply my own data sets against that, I can kind of put my process on guardrails. And that's really important for the enterprise decision maker to say, great, I understand that AI can, feed something back to me, can take some decisions, can make some recommendations, but I also know it can hallucinate, and I also know that it's drawing on a body of knowledge which nobody quite understands. Now, if I can limit that just to my body of knowledge, again, my data set, my database from the last several years or last, however long I want, or policies. So if I'm writing HR policies, and we do a lot of finance processes and a lot of HR type processes, so expense reports, leave requests, invoice approvals, payments, and usually for most companies, there are already policies written. And of course, when you get onboarded as an employee, a lot of times the first thing you'll get is, hey, here's a ream of policies, read these policies. But now I really don't need to do that because I can just say, well, I'll just apply for an expense report and have the AI reading the policies and applying what's in the policies to the decisions that are made on the expense report. Or better yet, why would I ever even file an expense report? We now have the ability to design the process such that the process kicks off on the last day of the month. It goes out, it downloads my credit card statements. It determines when I started a flight, when I finished a flight. It determines where a particular meal was had. So it's probably a business meal. It can calculate the cost of that meal to decide, was this one person or was this 3 people? Did I drink alcohol? Is that permitted in the policy to be reimbursed? So all of those things, think about all of that time that there is no reason for a human to do that anymore. So I think everybody right now is rewriting that process, and that's the process we'll see coming out in the next couple months. So it fundamentally changes what you can do with the business process and the way you can think about it.
Oh, that's great, Brian. I think Apoorva will ask a few questions. He had a few questions.
Yeah, thanks, Kunal. So, Brian, we are approaching the end of our conversation. There are a couple of things that have piqued my interest a lot. So I'll directly dive into it, right? So a big announcement from ProcessMaker happened recently in April 2024, and we are super excited to understand, like, I'll just give you a small context why our interest is piqued so much, right? So at Quadrant, within our BPM team, Pranjal and myself, we are working towards process mining as well, right? And you are in interactions with Pranjal. So about a year ago, we developed the concept of intelligent process excellence, and because we believe that it's not just process mining, task mining that vendors or even end users should be looking into, but the entire market should be driven towards something like a process intelligence, which ultimately we think the aim is towards attaining excellence, right? So in that sense is what we are trying to frame our project intelligent process excellence as. And obviously we can't help but notice that the reason for acquisition, as you guys have mentioned, it's to add those the next generation process intelligence capabilities to the existing strong process automation suite that ProcessMaker has. So I really want to understand, like, what was the thought process, and what is the vision of ProcessMaker post acquiring Workfellow, right? So if you could throw some light on that regard.
Yeah. So I'm happy you asked that question. So it was about just over 2 months ago that we acquired Workfellow. Workfellow was a Finnish company focused on process intelligence, and so we had come in contact with the Workfellow team. Really liked what they were doing. Loved the technology they had built and the team they had assembled. And process intelligence, we had been looking at that for quite some time. numerous competitors of ours have acquired process mining and task mining companies, and you don't have to be a genius to understand the adjacencies in the IPO market. So again, the ability to do some RPA, the ability to do the Gen AI. So there's always going to, the IDP, there's always that idea of, well, you either have to build it, buy it, or partner. And we see, because these things are becoming indistinguishable, it's important for us to have that as part of the orchestration, because the customer really doesn't think about it in terms of technologies, they think about it in terms of the service that's being delivered. Now, with the case of Workfellow, they had a unique approach to process intelligence, and we'd always been fascinated by this idea that, okay, when you get to ProcessMaker, you have a process, you want to automate it, you hopefully have many, many processes you want to automate. But most of the businesses we deal with, in fact, all of the business we deal with, they didn't just appear yesterday. In other words, they have processes they're running today, and they're looking at ProcessMaker because they want to do it better. And to do that, I watch our sales team, they produce business cases for users. I watch our partners produce business cases of why change, why now, what will it mean? And to do that, you really have to understand the as is. How is the process being done today? So Workfellow had a very unique approach. It's kind of a combination of task mining and process mining. So it does both log ingestion, which is what process mining does, and then user kind of viewing, which is what task mining does. But they had a really interesting approach there, completely GDPR compliant. It's never sending any type of PII data back. It's completely visible what applications you're kind of watching to understand what the user is doing. And there's just so much that the user does outside of the main application. So we like that approach, because we found when we have looked, and it's usually hard to find, because you ask a user, how do you do your AP process? And they say, well, I do it in SAP. Or how do you do your employee onboarding process? And they say, well, I do that in ADP, my HRIS tool. But then when you watch the user, you realize they're doing so many other things. They're consulting in Excel. They're opening up a PDF. They're copying and they're pasting. They're swivel chairing between one screen to another. So Workfellow, by making that part of ProcessMaker, it gives us a way now to discover the as is, to understand the KPIs as they are today. How long is it taking? What's the median? How many variants are happening in an accounts payable process? And then we can sit down more intelligently with the customer, or our partners can sit down with the customer and say, look, this is your process today. This is how long it takes you. This is the median. This is what how long each team takes to perform the process. So now let's sit down intelligently and discuss how to automate it better in ProcessMaker, or which pieces could be better automated. So it really just gives us that visibility, the ability to audit how a process is being done, no matter what tool somebody's working in: Excel, email, Acrobat readers, the core system. And we can put together the reality, and then we can go attack the most valuable processes, and we can assign costs to it, so we know exactly what each transaction is costing.
Great, that sounds wonderful. I think we are running out of time as well, and Brian, we are at the absolute last leg of this conversation. So I'll circle back to iBPMS. I think the topic that we began from, I'll just try to hit the nail right there. Vendors are moving at a rapid speed. Everyone has their own direction. There is Gen AI coming in. There's the orchestration point. There's the intelligence point, and there are many other things, right? So in this context, how does ProcessMaker visualize itself in terms of the growth potential of iBPMS market, the regions of possible growth for iBPMS market, and in short, what is the core vision of ProcessMaker moving forward, right, in the current era? Just wanted to understand that.
Yeah, so I think we are really excited about the market, and it's funny because, of course, analysts like Quadrant influence how we feel about the market. If you say it's a hot market, then we say, well, this is great, but sometimes it's coming in and out of favor. Like I said, it's been around in formats of BPM for a long time, but we do think it's a market that suddenly has become very hot again. And it's become hot because there's so many interesting new ways to get work done thanks to Gen AI. And now you really need to make sure that that is happening across the service you're trying to deliver. Again, that service orientation. And that's where IPO comes in, Intelligent Process Orchestration comes in. So we're really excited about it. We know that everybody is saying, hey, we're an AI company, we're a Gen AI company, and we can't really help but say the same thing because we've got these Gen AI types of tasks. But I would say that there's that other layer of how you orchestrate your AI from the perspective of the process, which is for a long time not going to just happen with one AI. It's still going to be a combination of technologies. And so we are essentially looking for better and better ways to combine existing technologies plus your AI agents plus your human agents to make sure that the process is visible, auditable, and improving and more easily done. So we're really excited by that space. We think the models themselves are going to tend to be open source and free, and so then it becomes a matter of how you connect different things and get information in and out of the AI correctly. And from an organizational standpoint, we think that there's really no better language than the process language that we've been developing, vendors like us have been developing for the last 10, 20 years. It just works great for complex business processes. We think that also in the areas of the organization we tend to focus on, we do a lot in the CFO office, a lot in kind of HR and IT. There are so many processes that will begin to kind of merge, and we can sort of define functions, and those are job functions in terms of the processes they're performing, and come to an organization and say, look, we have a suite of processes that can really augment or even, replace some types of work so that workers, of course, can move on to bigger and better things. So we're excited about our position in the market. We're excited about what the kind of Gen AI piece is doing to revolutionize that orchestration layer, and we're continuing to forge ahead in it.
That sounds like a perfect wrap to this conversation. Those were the questions from my side, and I believe Kunal's side as well. Kunal, you have anything to add?
No.
Okay. So I think that's it from the analyst side. So I'll hand it over to Ajinkya. And thank you so much, Brian. It was a great interaction. And at Quadrant Knowledge Solutions, and especially the analyst community at Quadrant, we value the participation from your side and vendors like you. And it's very important to have these conversations, I feel, because that's where the core of the primary conversation is. And I think that is where those insights, those misunderstandings, they get shoved off. I think core insights get developed and a clear understanding about the future market that also gets unveiled. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks to Quadrant, and really been a pleasure speaking to you, Kunal, and you, Apoorva, as well.
Thank you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, Brian, Apoorva, and Kunal for an engaging and informative discussion. Your insights on future of the iBPMS market, current trends, growth potential, the end user adoption trends, and the significance of intelligent orchestrations have been incredibly valuable. To our audience, thank you for joining us on Expert Edge. We hope you found this session insightful and thought-provoking. Stay tuned for more such conversations with the industry leaders and experts. Until next time, keep exploring, stay ahead in the ICT domain. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.